I'm live again. Woohoo! So, today we're going to talk about how the Knicks beat the new CBA, because obviously this blockbuster trade for Cat has made a lot of noise around the league. Not just because, they traded for Cat, who has been an all-star, but it's the fact that they were able to do this while being above the first apron, which is supposed to put a lot of limitations and restrictions on teams. That is why they made this new CBA, so that when you're above a certain tax apron, salary range, you can't make as many moves, because they were trying to prevent, whatever, super teams from happening and trades and all these kind of things. So, we're going to talk about how the Knicks beat the CBA and were super creative and figured a loophole around this, new CBA. And so they were able to get Towns and Bridges, because I don't know if you remember, but a couple months ago, they also got Bridges. And that was also part of this loophole deal that they did. So I read an article, obviously, to make sure I had all my information correct. So here's how it actually went down. The Knicks actually were sort of, according to the article, makes sense, sort of planning this back in March. So you may be thinking in March, they didn't know they were going to trade for Towns or Bridges. And that's true. They weren't sure they were going to trade for Towns or Bridges. I think they kind of knew they wanted Bridges, but Towns, they didn't know, right? However, they knew, again, according to this article, and it makes sense based on what they were doing, that they wanted to figure out a way where they can make sure that they can get a star player in the offseason with their current roster and their tax situation. So what they did was, back in March, they signed Daquan Jeffries and Diakite to season contracts. So they signed them for the rest of that season, and then made the second season non-guaranteed. Oh, I see a bear. Thank you, Sal. 2 bears. I appreciate that. So what they did was they signed Daquan Jeffries and Diakite to, like I said, contracts for the rest of the season, but they signed them for non-guaranteed for the second season, right? So what this did was, it started the motion giving them the leverage for the offseason to make moves. Why? Because Daquan Jeffries was included in the deal for Cat. So we'll talk about, that in a second. But just know that this was kind of, brewing back in March when they made these deals. Diakite was also included in the Mikal Bridges trade. So now let's fast forward to the offseason, whatever. One of the new rules of the CBA, from how I understand it, is that when you are above the first tax apron, you are not able to take back more salary than you are giving. So in both of these trades, their salary cap, the amount they're spending, actually went up. So how is that possible? That is what the CBA was trying to prevent from happening. That you can't take in more than you're, giving to whatever team you're trading with. But the Knicks ended up doing that. So that's where the loophole starts. And again, this is all my understanding from reading the article, sharing the information. Because I'm sure a lot of people are like, how did they do this? I'm a little confused. And, it is really creative and smart of the Knicks. They were super smart and creative, and because they found this loophole, there are other teams who are going to probably try to do this in the future. But anyway, back to what was happening. So when they did the Mikal Bridges trade, we saw that it was Mikal Bridges, 5 first-round picks and all that stuff, right? Well, Diakite was included in the trade. So one of the things they did was, technically, again, by the article, what it said, they inflated their assets, or rather they inflated the outgoing salaries by sending Diakite and also signing and trading Shake Milton to Brooklyn. So the sign and trade inflated their outgoing salaries, if that makes sense. So they were using players who were on their roster, but again, Diakite got moved to Brooklyn and Shake Milton was a free agent, but they did a sign and trade. So that's how they were able to get around it and get Mikal Bridges. So that was the first trade. It happened, all that. There really wasn't much discussion after the Mikal Bridges trade, about how they got around this new CBA because, I see Chris joined. Thank you, Chris. Thank you for joining. I said like a thing over there. Chris joined with like the purple thing. I don't know. I'm still learning this new like how TikTok Live works and stuff like that. So I don't know exactly what that feature means, but I appreciate it. So back to what I was saying. So that happened from the Mikal Bridges trade. No one was really talking about why or how they were able to get around, being able to take back more salary, but I think people just, let it go. Or I wasn't even thinking about it either, you know what I'm saying? But like I'm saying the real technical people were probably thinking about it, but like they just let it go. But now that they did the Cat trade too, now it's getting a lot of attention. So now we fast forward to Cat. Well, remember Daquan Jeffries that we talked about earlier, how they signed him to that contract in March? Well, what they did was they sent him to Charlotte in the Cat deal, right? But they also signed and traded Charlie Brown Jr. and Dwayne Washington Jr. in the Cat deal. So similar to how they did the Shake Milton thing, they did it with Dwayne Washington Jr. and Charlie Brown Jr. And from what I understood and what I read as well in a different article is that one of the things that you also cannot do is apparently aggregate multiple minimum level salaries in a deal, in a trade to make it work. That part is like a little confusing to me also, but like basically you can't have multiple minimum salaries going in a deal to make it, work money-wise or whatever. So what they did was apparently they signed Dwayne Washington Jr. and Charlie Brown Jr. to a minimum deal, a minimum deal plus $1. So you know what that means? They were making, let's say the minimum is $1 million. They were making $1,000,001. They did that on purpose. They paid them the extra dollar so they can include them in the deal. Isn't that a crazy loophole? And it's something that could be so easily exploited. I don't know how the NBA didn't see that coming. I would have never thought of that because I don't even know what the CBA says. You know what I mean? I'm not a lawyer. So if I knew all the rules, then yeah, maybe. But the fact that it was a pretty easy rule to exploit if you figure it out. If you think about it, again, I'm not saying it's easy in general terms to think of that, but someone who is an expert at this is what they're looking for, loopholes. So what they did was, like I said, sign them to $1 over the minimum. And so with all those things, they were able to figure out a way to take in more salary and get Cat. And again, from my understanding is that they are still $3.6 million below the second tax apron with these moves. And they didn't have to dip into a bunch of, other players on their roster because generally speaking, they might have had to include, Miles McBride or somebody else if they were going to. Thank you, Bryant, for joining. I see a little diamond thing. Thank you. I appreciate it. So they were able to do this without including all those players. Now, obviously they had to include Dante DiVincenzo, and I read an article that said they were actually, and I don't know if this is 100% true, but that they were actually working on this deal for Cat back on draft night. Because if you remember, there was rumors that Robinson might be traded a couple months ago, but nothing happened. Apparently, they were trying to do the deal with Randall and Robinson, and Minnesota said no. They said, we're not doing that deal. And so 3 months later, I guess Minnesota said we want DiVincenzo, and and the Knicks were probably saying no, no, no. And then now they said yes. They did it. Maybe after the Mikal Bridges trade, like maybe once that got, solidified, that they were like, okay, we can trade DiVincenzo, I guess. Like, not that they wanted to, but maybe the Mikal Bridges trade kind of put that in motion. But again, I'm not an expert on the CBA. I'm not an expert on how this all works. I hope I, explain that well. And again, from what I understand, that is basically how they were able to get around the CBA and be able to, get to, well, Cat was an all-star. Was Mikal Bridges ever an all-star? I can't remember. He was in the candidacy. He was a candidate for Defensive Player of the Year, at one point. I don't think Mikal Bridges was ever an all-star. But you got two really, really, players who have a good resume. Let's just say that, right? While not having to give up a ton of assets. I mean, in terms of picks, they gave up a lot of picks, but they were just stockpiling picks for moves like this. Like, they weren't going to really use them anyway. I know that's like one of the criticisms around the Knicks is like they never use their draft picks. So I don't think they really care. That's not really the right word, but I don't think they really, they're not really bothered by having to give 5 first-round picks for Mikal Bridges. Like, maybe it was, more than someone else would have had to pay, but like, it was worth it for them in the end. So again, I hope I explained that properly, and I hope that that's exactly, what it was saying, because I made sure I read it a few times so I could understand, what was going on. But like I said, from what I understand is it was back in March, all the things I said, that's kind of how this trade, trades for Cat and Mikal Bridges came to be. And so now with this new, loophole that the Knicks figured out, you got to imagine we're going to see more teams trying to take this on and figuring out how to do this. Now, one of the other things that the article was saying is that it's definitely situational. Why? Because you have to have extra, if you want to do the thing that they did back in March, where they had Daquan Jeffries and Diakite and they signed them, you have to have extra roster spots in order to, sign these players that you want to use in the offseason for some kind of trade. So having extra roster spots, especially if you're trying to contend for a championship, is not always available. So that makes it a little bit tricky. The other thing is they were saying something to the effect of how they did the sign and trade with, Shake Milton, and Charlie Brown Jr. and Dwayne Washington Jr. It becomes trickier to do that mid-season at the trade deadline rather than before the season starts, because training camp, they have 21 players on the roster. So it's a little bit easier. That's kind of what they were saying. And so it is going to be situational for teams to, use this new loophole to their advantage. And it's just going to depend on, what the availability is as well around the league. But this is really, it's really interesting. It may spark something around the league, and the new CBA is locked in. It's signed, it's locked in, and it's effective for how many years? Either 7 or 11 years. It's here for a while. So the more loopholes that are found, it is what it is at this point. You know what I mean? The more teams look around and find loopholes, there's nothing, the NBA can do because the CBA is signed. So I do think it's kind of cool, not going to lie, that the Knicks found this loophole so soon after the CBA was introduced as well. And I don't know, I just think it's really interesting. I'm not rooting one way or another, for the CBA. Well, to be honest, I don't love some of the new rules of the CBA, in my opinion. I don't love some of these new rules. But I do think it's really cool that the Knicks found a loophole and now we're all talking about it. And the other thing is, from Minnesota's side, And it's funny because we're still talking about the Knicks trade, even though this was days ago. I see someone said, how fast do you think the NBA will change this rule? Well, I don't think they can change it until the next CBA, which is not for like 7 years or 11 years. Like, I forget how long it's locked in for, but the last CBA was 2017 and lasted till 2023. So that's 6 years, right? 2018, 2019, 2020, 21, 22, 23. Okay, that's 6 years. So I guess 6 years from now, that would be 2030. So around that time, so I said 7 years at first. I did say 11. I don't know. I feel like I remember them saying like it was a little bit longer, but maybe that's the TV deals that are like 11 years. Regardless, they have like 6 years that they're stuck with this contract, unless, I believe, again, not a lawyer, not an expert on these things, so don't take what I say word for word. However, if for some reason the NBA and the Players Association, or the NBPA, I believe if both parties, like, and I guess the owners too, like they all decided that they wanted to terminate the contract, I think that is an option, because I feel like if all parties, players, Player Association, NBA front office, NBA owners all like just wanted to terminate the CBA, I would think that's an option, but otherwise, and again, I don't know if that even is. So again, no legal advice from me, because I don't have any legal advice. But otherwise, no, they're pretty much stuck with the CBA and that rule and whatever else is found along the way. Someone said, can I get a quick recap update on the rule? Sure, so just quickly, like when I post this later, you can go back and watch, the whole explanation, but basically the loophole in a short version is like, you can't take in more salary than you have if you're above the first apron. Again, this is all from my understanding, not an expert, not a lawyer. Just, I like to keep saying that just to make sure, because I need to make sure that's clear. But when you're above the first apron, you can't take back more salary than you give out. And the Knicks were able to find loopholes in order to do that. Like they were able to take more salary than they technically gave out in a way. So when I post this video, you can, go back and watch and see like how I explained it in full details, but that's basically what this whole scenario is about. The fact that the Knicks were able to make these two blockbuster trades and stayed below the second tax apron, from my understanding, again, by 3.6 million, and just being able to make these moves without giving up a ton of their, players on their bench, like a Miles McBride and stuff like that. So I hope that makes sense. Someone said, you've explained it well. Thank you. I appreciate that. I tried my best because, again, like this CBA is complicated. I mean, they all are. I'm not going to lie. I went to the CBA because it's published online. You can, read it for free in your free time when you want to. And I was like, maybe I'll come on here and like read a page from the CBA or whatever. And I was like, maybe I can make like a series out of this, like reading the CBA and like trying to explain it as best as I can in my own terms without like, looking it up. Like basically just trying to understand it myself and then explaining it, but obviously making it clear that I'm not sure exactly what I'm talking about because I'm not a lawyer. But it's 676 pages. I was like, yeah, I don't know. That may be like a 5,000 part series if I try to do that. And I'm probably not going to understand a ton of it anyway. But I really was interested. I was like, maybe I'll do that. I don't know. I still have to think about it. Like, maybe I'll try to do that one time, but it's hard. Like, I was reading some of it because I was thinking about it. And some of it, like the wording, and it's so lengthy, and it's just like, it's hard to understand. And like, I don't even know how well I could even explain it. So it's still on the table, I guess. I'll think about it, but like, I don't know if I'm going to do that. But yeah, so I tried to learn and understand as best as I could, how the Knicks did this, because if I'm going to come on here and talk about it, I should know what I'm talking about, all right? Like, I should know what I'm talking about. So that's the best way I can, explain it, and hopefully what I said was accurate. For the last time, not a lawyer, not a cap expert, just read articles, and that's what I understood. So just making that clear. But from Minnesota's standpoint, Julius Randle. Now, they traded for Julius Randle, and some people have some question marks on, his fit and all that stuff. I think that Julius Randle, the trade itself was a good trade because I felt like it was time to move on from Cat, and they got out from his huge contract. Like, Cat has a gigantic contract. So, and I like the Dante DiVincenzo pickup, and they picked up a first-round pick from Detroit, which is what I'm going to talk about in a second, that the Knicks gave them. So, whether or not Julius Randle is a good fit is to be seen. But one of the things that they have flexibility now, and I was watching Brian Windhorst, his podcast. I think it's called The Hoop Collective. I'm not sure. I'm not exactly sure of the name of it. I've watched it a few times. I watch it here and there when I, just want to see an episode or whatever. And so he was on there with Bobby Marks and Tim Bontemps, and they were talking about the Knicks Minnesota trade, and they were what were they saying? Now I just lost my train of thought. I had a reason as to why I said that. It'll come back to me. I literally had a reason, but whatever. We'll talk about what I was going to say next. But Julius Randle, whether or not you think he's a good fit or not, the first round pick that they got from the Knicks makes it a little more interesting because that pick, this is what they were saying. Now I remember. So even though the pick is protected, I think it's top 13 protected. I believe if it falls out of the top 13, it rolls over and then it becomes less protected. And that's what happens with some of these picks over times. When they don't convert, like that year, the next year it's less protected. If they don't convert again, it's less protected. Don't quote me on that for this particular pick, but I believe that's how this one works. And so, if this pick doesn't convert this year, which it likely won't because we all expect Detroit to be a lottery team, then let's say next year it's top 8 protected. I don't know, but let's just say it is. When when Minnesota comes to the trade deadline, let's say Julius Randle is not a great fit, they can package him with that pick because that pick could be very valuable next year, a couple of years from now. Like, that pick might be very valuable. And Julius Randle's contract's almost up. So anybody who trades for him technically wouldn't have to pay him. Like, his contract is almost up. So this is actually a situation where Minnesota might be able to trade back for somebody who's under contract for a while, similar to how Cat was, but someone who they think is, a better fit and more, I don't want to say more worth the money because that's not the right way to say it, but someone that they were like, we want to pay that, player $30 million per year for 4 more years or whatever it is. So they can actually leverage that pick, which can be very, very valuable with Julius Randle. So that is something that I think is very, very interesting. Someone said, are you actually live? What do you mean? I'm on live. How is this a pre-recording? I don't know. It just that's like the most interesting comment I've ever got. Because I'm literally on live. It's funny. So I see someone said, could Minnesota use the pick to shed more salary? Yes. Wait, hold on. Because Minnesota is still above the first tax apron, I believe. So they have to, yeah, they can. Because, again, by the rules, they have to give out more than they take back in. So technically, I guess, yeah, they can, but I don't really see I don't know if I really see what the point of that would be unless they're trading Randle and Gobert to clear money for somebody else. Because otherwise, they're not in a position like like the Sixers were this offseason, where the Sixers had nobody on the books except Joel Embiid. So they don't have like a max slot available at this moment. So like, to me, it wouldn't make sense to trade Randall with that first round pick if you're not getting back like a player that you're gonna either sign long term or, you know, is already signed long term. Like, to me, that wouldn't really make sense. But I guess they technically can do that. But yeah, that's that's my opinion. So yeah, the point is, like, Minnesota can actually flip Julius Randle for potentially someone who is not available right now, but may be available at the trade deadline. Like, you know, players always become available, so that is something to look out for. So this Minnesota, you know, Knicks trade is getting more interesting by the day because things just keep happening. And, you know, we don't know what's next. And then also back to the Knicks for a second. For Mitchell Robinson, like I said, there was like a report that, you know, they were going to trade him to, they were going to try to trade him to Minnesota for the cat deal and whatever. Didn't happen. But Mitchell Robinson could be an interesting player on the market if they do decide that they want to trade him. Because when he's healthy, he's a very, very good player. But the issue is he has a lot of injuries, especially like lower leg foot injuries, which are unfortunately like really bad for people who are centers, because I don't know, like, it just seems to be that centers tend to get more foot injuries and stuff like that, or like lower leg injuries. It just seems to be a common occurrence amongst big men. And so it limits your mobility, and it limits your ability, you know, to not only use your foot or your leg, you know, in the sense of like your athleticism and all that stuff, but also it limits your ability to do cardio and all these other kind of things that you use to be in NBA shape. Like, it's not just that you break your foot, for example, and then it heals and you're all fine, and that's fine. Like, Mitchell Robinson is healing. But it's also the fact that it takes you like completely out of your conditioning, because you can't run, you can't, you know, do leg presses, or, you know, you can't do any of those things. So it really makes it difficult, lower leg injuries for basketball players. I mean, any kind of injury is, you know, difficult, but I'm just saying, like, lower leg injuries really can take a lot out of you, because if you break your wrist as an NBA player, like, obviously there are so many disadvantages to that. Like, you can't shoot, you can't dribble, like, you know, a bunch of things. But the one thing that you can do at least is, like, since your lower body is still okay, you can still be in like physical conditioning shape, if that makes sense. Like, you can, you know, run and stuff like that. Like, okay, your arms are going to lose some muscle and stuff like that because you can't use it as much. But I'm saying, like, does that make sense? Like, I'm trying to explain it properly. Like, you can still run up and down the court and keep your conditioning. So, like, when you come back, you're not going to be gassed when you play 5 minutes, because you'll still be in shape. You just may not be in rhythm shooting wise. Does that make sense? I'm not saying having a broken wrist is good. No injury is good. I'm just saying, like, there are like different levels to different injuries. And because Mitchell Robinson has so many lower leg injuries, it makes keeping, you know, staying in basketball condition, like conditioning for a game, like really hard. And so I say all that to say, he is someone who is very good when he's healthy. But he could become an interesting trade piece for the Knicks if they decide to explore that and use him to trade for someone at the deadline. Now, I don't know who's going to be available. And Mitchell Robinson doesn't have like a really crazy contract. His contract is pretty reasonable. But someone has to be willing to take a chance on him because of, you know, his injury history. And while I don't think it's impossible, like I said, his contract is not like crazy, I do think it's a little bit harder because of his injury history. But that is something definitely to look out for as well with the Knicks, because they are trying to win a championship. And they're definitely trying to solidify their center rotation. And Mitchell Robinson cannot be available and healthy. They may have to move him at some point. And then I guess they'd be moving him for another center. But like, it would have to be someone that a team, I guess, is willing to give up and wants Mitchell Robinson more. I don't know. It'll be interesting. So that is something to keep in mind. But thank you guys for, participating and joining and saying hello. I appreciate the gift. And so, yeah, we'll see what happens from here. But see you guys soon. Bye.